Hi, I'm Candice Malcolm, and this is the Candice Malcolm Show. We have a great episode for you today, folks. We're going to do more of a news show today because there are a lot of updates coming down the pike. We have heard from Prime Minister Mark Carney, and well, let's just say his message is quite a bit different than the one that we had during the election campaign. We're going to talk about Trump's tariffs as well, and there is a New York Magazine article that's gone viral about how furious Canadians are. We're going to dive into that a little bit later in this show. But first, let's start by talking about the trade war updates. So as you know, as we talked about on the show with Chris Sims on Monday, President Donald Trump has again changed his mind and again decided to go back to the on again, off again tariffs. Well, they're back on again. So last Thursday, President Trump took to Truth Social to announce that the United States will implement pretty much an across the board 35% tariff on Canada. I'm going to read a little bit from the letter that he posted. This was July 10th, which was last Thursday. He basically says, folks, that instead of working with the United States, Canada has retaliated with its own tariffs. And so starting on August 1st, 2025, we will charge Canada a tariff of 35% on Canadian products sent into the United States. He goes on to say that if Canada retaliates again with more tariffs, well, then we will get another 35% tariff. I want to specifically talk about what President Trump mentions in this letter because I think it's important. He says, I must mention the flow of fentanyl is hardly the only challenge we have with Canada, which has many tariff and non-tariff policies and trade barriers, which cause unsustainable trade deficits against the United States. Canada charges extraordinary tariffs on our dairy farmers, up to 400%. And that is assuming our dairy farmers have access to sell their products to the people of Canada. Now, I hate to say it, folks, but President Trump is right. So there has been an issue in Canada with supply management. This is something that conservatives like me have been talking about for, a decade or longer now. This was an issue during the Harper government as well. Many conservatives want to do away with the supply management quota system that benefits a handful of farmers in Quebec and Ontario. And it seems to me that this is one of the issues that President Trump is raising and saying, hey, it's not fair that you have this quota system, that you don't allow us to import our dairy. And so we're now basically facing a situation, folks, where a small handful of industry insiders are holding the rest of the country hostage, basically saying, we want our privilege, we want our special government quota. It's basically like a communist quota. And because of that, we're going to deindustrialize our entire country because President Trump issuing these tariffs, they will be devastating to the Canadian economy. That's a bit of an aside. And so at the time when President Trump issued this rather shocking statement, Mark Carney, our prime minister, was on vacation. And rather than coming back and getting to Ottawa and rolling up his sleeves, Canadians elected him for that purpose. Mark Carney was on vacation in an undisclosed location, and he did not return to work. Instead, he said, hey, folks, we're going to have a virtual cabinet meeting next week to deal with this. Well, the cabinet meeting was held yesterday in Ottawa on Tuesday. And here is what Mark Carney had to say when he was entering Parliament for the first time since Trump issued this new tariff.
First thing to say is the government has consistently stood up for Canadian workers and businesses throughout these negotiations. We'll continue to do so. I expect that the discussions will intensify between now and the end of the month, and we'll be working hard on that. At the same time, we need to recognize that the commercial landscape globally has changed. It's changed in a fundamental manner, and we will continue to focus on what we can most control, which is building a strong Canadian economy. And that's part of what we'll be discussing in Cabinet today. And a strong Canadian.
So you have the sort of boring diplomatic answer there. Now, interestingly, he is pressed a little bit. And now speaking in French, he has a slightly different message. So speaking in French, this is transcribed, but it is in French. He basically just says there's not a lot that we can do. These tariffs are going to happen, and we're just going to have to deal with it. Let's play that clip.
There's not a lot of evidence right now. And with regards to negotiations for any country or any jurisdiction to have a tariff-free agreement.
So there you go. Carney tells Canadians that a tariff-free deal with the United States is unlikely. But wait a minute. We just fought an entire election where Mark Carney and the legacy media told us that Mark Carney was the one who can roll up his sleeves and negotiate, that he's the one that can deal with this crisis, and that if anyone can talk to President Donald Trump and talk him off the ledge on these tariffs, it would be Mark Carney a slightly different message, much more somber, much more realistic, to basically just say, yeah, we're going to have to deal with this. We're going to have to pivot and figure out different trading partners. Well, first of all, it's a little too late. I mean, it's like we could have built out a huge trading network of partners and been selling our energy and doing all kinds of things over the last decade. That's not the policy that the Trudeau Liberals pursued. And now we're stuck. I mean, the Americans, we're married to them geographically, right? We can't move our location. They are the biggest market in the world. And so much of our economy is set up to trade with them. So it's not like we can just turn around and change our partners. Pierre Poilievre, leader of the Conservative, took to social media yesterday to rightly call out the Prime Minister for basically just shrugging his shoulders and saying, well, there's not much that can be done here. So here's what Pierre Poilievre had to say on X. The Prime Minister is now conceding that American tariffs on Canada will be part of an eventual deal, another unilateral concession from a man who said he would never back down to U.S. President Donald Trump. That's exactly right, folks. We were told that Mark Carney was going to be fighting and, to his last breath against President Trump to make sure that we don't get stuck with these tariffs. And yet that's not what's happening. I'm going to do a little bit of a flashback here back to February 2025, February 16th, just earlier this year, during a leadership campaign interview with the CBC's Rosemary Barton. Carney literally said that he was the one, he should be prime minister, that he was the person for the job because he will be able to negotiate with President Trump because he's a good negotiator and that he would get a deal done for Canada. Let's remind you of what that looked like.
It would be helpful for Canadians to know exactly what you would do when it comes to tariffs. So why are you being so reticent to talk about that?
Because I'm a good negotiator. I have negotiated a number of situations in the past. I know how to manage crises. I know what you do in the order you can control things.
So a little bit of a different tone back then. And, he said, just trust me, folks, Canadians, I've done this. I've been here before. I'm a good negotiator. And we did, right? Enough Canadians, 46% of the population decided to give this guy a chance and say, okay, go ahead. We trust you to negotiate with President Trump. And look, I'll concede that President Trump's not an easy person to negotiate. He's quite erratic. And yet he has pointed to the same handful of issues over and over again, saying, these are my problems. My problem is, number one, with the flow of drugs, which we know that's a real problem. We've had Sam Cooper on this program many times, the leading investigative journalist in Canada and probably in the world, the subject matter expert who has exposed what President Trump is talking about. And then on the other hand, Canada is not a Boy Scout when it comes to trade. We have all kinds of subsidies, all kinds of schemes to benefit Canadian industries. And that is what President Trump is talking about when he's talking about the 400% dairy subsidy. He's talking about supply management, right? And so rather than Canada really trying to address these issues, we put in the central banker who said he's going to negotiate, that he's the one, he can negotiate. And yet here we are midsummer. Most people are, enjoying the summer outdoors, maybe at the cottage, maybe at the cabin, maybe at Lake Country, and they're not really paying attention. And meanwhile, our prime minister is just shrugging his shoulders, saying, "So tariffs are just going to be a part of the life with me as prime minister and with President Trump as leader of the U.S." And again, that's not what Canadians voted for. So this is interesting. Angus Reid put out a survey yesterday. Canadians split on whether Mark Carney can deliver trade deals. Head down or elbows up, Canadian divided. 46% of Canadians are now confident that Carney can deliver a good deal for Canada. Meanwhile, 45% say they're not confident. So again, 46% is pretty much what got Mark Carney elected. It's all it takes in this country to become prime minister. And so those 46% of Canadians that voted for the guy, I guess they're still confident that he can deliver a good deal for Canada. Interestingly, 53% of those not confident say that the Carney government is poorly qualified to deal with the Trump administration. And so you can see on the left there, it says, which of the following would you say is closer to the reason you're not confident? So again, 53% of Canadians say that they're just not confident that President Trump, that Carney can deal with President Trump. Only 47% are confident. And, the reason is, do you think it's the Trump administration is too predictable? Those are the blue lines. Or that the Carney government is just poorly qualified. More Canadians say that the Carney government is just poorly qualified to deal with them. So we're sort of setting ourselves up for failure when we have this person, Mark Carney, who's never led anything. He's never been elected to anything prior to becoming the leader of our country. And he was basically put into office, installed by the Liberal Party, by the legacy media elites. They painted the narrative very early on that said that only Mark Carney can deal with President Trump. And all of a sudden, Canadian patriotism became like the current thing, right? Like everyone was suddenly okay with waving the Canadian flag. Remember back during the trucker convoy when the legacy media and the Laurentian elites tried to tell us that it was actually racist to fly the Canadian flag, that if you're flying the Canadian flag, it was because you were a radical bigot or an anti-vaxxer or one of the crazy truckers. And that wasn't something that mainstream Canadians and polite society should do. Well, suddenly it flipped and we got Canadian patriotism back. Now, this is sort of an anecdote, but I was talking to a friend of mine who lives in Ottawa. He lives in the Glebe, which for those who don't know, it's a very sort of progressive, hipster, cool area populated. Again, this is Ottawa. So most of the people who live around here work for the federal government. They're civil servants. And he was telling me about how people just love to have lawn signs and signs in their windows and hanging all kinds of stuff from their houses when you're walking through this nice sort of old development, old growth neighborhood in pretty central Ottawa. And so he went back and he said, in 2020, the current thing, it was COVID, right? So everybody had signs up saying, thank you, nurses, thank you, frontline workers, and sort of having solidarity around the fact that we were just going to shut down our entire economy and thanking the people who were still going to go to work. Next summer rolls around, 2021. What was the zeitgeist? It was Black Lives Matter. So you saw a lot of BLM flags and posters. And then you also had the 215 unmarked graves story, which of course we know turned out to be quite the hoax. But anyway, at that time, 2021, it was Every Child Matters and people wearing waving orange flags. 2022, just, flip the switch, Ukraine. Everybody put the Ukraine flags out. It was blue and yellow everywhere. He said that in 2023, that had kind of evolved into like Pride Progress and gay pride and all that kind of stuff had taken over. And then, 2024, the next thing was Palestine. So out with Ukraine flags, out with Pride Progress, in with the Palestine flags. And fast forward to this year, 2025, what did we get? What did we get? Canada flags. The current thing became Canada, and Canadian patriotism came back in style. And let me tell you, the left-wing boomer crowd just absolutely flocked to it. They were so pumped and so thrilled to finally be able to be proud Canadians again, because for the past 4 or 5 years, the elites and the institutions and the opinion makers that they follow told them that being Canadian was racist, that if you were a proud Canadian, it was because you were a colonial settler, that your family members, your ancestors probably engaged in genocide, that Canada is an illegitimate country. And interestingly, a lot of the left-wing boomers still hold this belief. They still believe that Canada is somehow an illegitimate country. And yet, in the face of the Trump trade debacle, they were allowed to be proud Canadians again. And I think they probably took it a little far. Another anecdote, I was talking to a friend who went out to Stratford, which is where they have a big Shakespeare festival every summer. They do a lot of plays and shows. And so my friend went out there and she said that, of course, before the play began, they did a land acknowledgement where they basically say that Canada is an illegitimate country and that we're living on stolen land. But then right after that, they sang the national anthem. And she said that she'd been going to Stratford for 25 years and she's never heard them sing the national anthem before show. But this year, she asked someone about why the national anthem was being sung and was basically told it was, to push back against the Americans and to say, we're asserting our sovereignty by singing the national anthem before a play. So, being a Canadian patriotism is now like, it's not just because you love your country and you've always loved your country and you've always been here for your country. It's really a political symbol to push back against the Americans and Trump, which is in my mind a little silly, right? Like if you love Canada, you should be here for the country, no matter how bad things get, no matter what happens. These people were not here for the country over the past 5 years. They were the ones that were accusing us of all kinds of heinous things, and now all of a sudden they want to see. They want to be the face of Canadian patriotism. So I have to tie it to this New York Magazine piece that has been going viral on social media. Canadians are furious. Trump accomplished what was once considered impossible. Our northern neighbors have united against us. And you can see the cover of this New York Magazine piece. You have no idea how furious Canadians are with the angry beaver choking the bald eagle there. And I mean, I would just cross out that word furious and write gullible. You have no idea how gullible Canadians are, because so much of this elbows up movement is just so inherently contradictory, right? The idea that Canadians are going out of their way to avoid American products and that they're buying only made in Canada items. And yet, I mean, there was like a really famous meme that was going around during the election that kind of perfectly sums it up. You have Hudson Bay, Canada's oldest company, going out of business, going bankrupt because Canadians don't shop there anywhere. And you have a lineup of old white boomers lining up at Walmart, and they're all saying elbows up, shop Canadian, Canadian only products, while consuming their goods from a large American outfitter, right? Like, Canadians at the end of the day are going to buy what's cheaper and what's better, but then they want to have the facade of, oh, we're only buying Canadian, right? Like, I think this perfectly was summed up by a very famous Liberal commentator, posted on X the other day. He said, if you're still buying American products and you're a proud Canadian, you have to give your head a shake. Like, there's something wrong with you, right? And yet he literally said this on Twitter, on X, which is a American social media platform, right? So they want to performatively boycott American goods, and they want to get the credit for it, for being a good Canadian. And yet, of course, like, their daily lives are so intertwined with the American economy that it's actually quite impossible not to. And it's just sort of like this frenzy, right? I think in some ways it's like Canadians want permission to love their country again, right? They were told for 4 years that being Canadian is racist, basically. And they want to. They love Canada deep down. And now they finally have that, like, social permission, and that's all well and good. But this whole kind of idea that you should sell off your American property, and, like, how dare you visit your family members in the United States or go on a vacation, and how dare you shop at an American store. And every time I go to the grocery store, it's like, the Canadian products have the big made in Canada sticker right on it. And then it'll be like, twice the price of, like, the American good that's right next to it that you're probably going to end up buying, because at the end of the day, Canada is so expensive. Thanks a lot, in large part, to Liberal government policies where they just print money out of control and drive up inflation. That, at the end of the day, you probably are going to want to buy the cheaper item, but you want to do the performative thing. And you want to show the Americans. The sad reality, though, this was a funny meme that was shared, is that, while Canadians really, really care about the trade issue, and we want the Americans to know that we're really, really furious at them, the Americans don't really care, right? The idea is that there's so much going on in their country, and Trump is doing so many things. You might not like one or two of them, but you might really, really like 5 or 6 of them. And the Canada trade issue is such a small component of it. And so if we could just show this meme, this was shared. So, the Canadians up top saying, "I feel bad for you." And there we have the madman, Don Draper, replying, "Well, I don't think about you at all." And I think that's exactly right. Canadians are very preoccupied and obsessed with this feud, and the Americans are just living their life, and it doesn't really have a big impact on them, sadly. So, folks, that's all the time we have for today. But really, I think if you're going to love Canada, you should do it every day, all the time, and not just when you're furious with the American president. Shouldn't really define us as a country. All right, folks, thanks so much for tuning in. We'll be back again tomorrow. I'm Candice Malcolm. This is Candice Malcolm Show. Thank you, and God bless.